Welcome to another episode of Oshkosh Area Politics. My name is Ben Schneider, and today we'll focus on the April elections. Joining us in the discussions this evening is Professor of Communication from the University of Wisconsin-Oshkosh and former Common Council member and former Deputy Mayor of the City of Oshkosh is Dr. Tony Palmeri. Tony, thanks for joining our program again.
Hey, thanks for having me. Always great to be here.
Well, we appreciate you coming on, and a lot of people may not even realize that there's an April election coming up on April 2nd, the first Tuesday.
True.
And part of the reason is because perhaps there's so much snow that maybe they don't exist, or maybe they're there but they're buried. We don't see any yard signs out, but there are 6 elections on the ballot. There's 2 statewide races and 4, I guess, local races. But it just seems like there's not a lot of interest in local running for local office this time around, and frankly, there's actually 3 of the 6 races have really no opposition.
Right.
And one local race has a perennial candidate that, you know, many people feel it's going to be a stretch for him to get elected. So I guess I'd like to ask you your opinion in terms of why do you think that there's so little interest in local races this time around?
Well, first of all, I mean, I don't want to exaggerate, but I really think it is a crisis. I mean, I don't think that is too harsh of a term. If you've got a representative government that is supposed to be run by the people, and the people are not putting their name out to run, I call that a crisis of democracy. I certainly don't think that we're having a lack of candidates because people are happy with what's going on. I mean, I'm sure you, like me, hear high levels of dissatisfaction out there. So I assume it's a couple of factors. I mean, time. I know that when I was on the Common Council, it was if you wanted to do the job properly, it took a lot of reading, a lot of phone calls, a lot of meeting with constituents. I'm sure you did all that on the school board. Not everybody has that time. I think another factor is that Oshkosh politics tends to be very establishment-oriented, that often for the Common Council, for example, candidates come from things like Leadership Oshkosh and other Chamber of Commerce affiliated organizations or entities, and those folks have not run this year, probably because the establishment maybe has figured that they've gotten pretty much everything they've wanted over the last few years, and they may feel that, hey, why upset an apple cart that is benefiting us? Also, now, as you know, we've talked about this on your show before. I tend to divide Oshkosh politics into establishment and anti-establishment. For those of us that are anti-establishment, I mean, let's face it, when you run, you're going to get beaten up. Some of us have thick skin and can handle that, but I've met lots of people in the community who will say things like, I'm not going to run for office, maybe get in, only to be cut down sometimes on the front page of the newspaper in a local office. All right, so, I still think, though, people have the obligation to step forward, but in a town where standing against the powers that be is, very uncomfortable, I could see why that type of candidate elects to sit out. The other thing, Ben, and this is true probably throughout the country, local offices are nonpartisan. And, all right, people don't like partisanship. They think it's too divisive. On the other hand, if you did have partisan local races, I would find it shocking if the Republican and Democratic Party would not run candidates for seats. I mean, what would that say about a political party if they could not field a local candidate? And I think if we had local partisan offices, you would not only see Democrats and Republicans, you'd see the Green Party running candidates, you'd see the Libertarians, you'd see other independent parties. So those are just some of the factors, but it is troubling.
Well, and actually, I've lived in this community my whole life, and I've certainly followed politics, actually most of my adult life, pretty intently. And I don't recall an election, a spring election, local election cycle in which there's so little interest in running for office. A community of roughly, the city of Oshkosh, over 60,000 people. Mm-hmm. Let's conservatively say there's over 35,000 eligible people to run for local office. And out of the county exec, and that's obviously county-wide, so the pool is much greater, over 100,000. Right. The mayor of the city of Oshkosh and the school board, which is a bigger pool than the city, there is really no opposition. You know, the county exec, Mark Harris, is up. He's just finishing up his second term.
Yeah.
He actually has no opposition. I know 4 years ago he had some opposition because he supported the 0.5% sales tax and that kind of, you know, he was successful in his reelection effort there. The mayor of Oshkosh, Burke Tower, he was elected to his first term 2 years ago. He has no opposition, which I'd like to ask you about in a second. Sure. And the Common Council, there's 3 open seats and there's only 2 individuals running. Yeah. So, you know, in fact, there's 3 open seats, 2 running, but there's 2 registered write-ins. And many speculate one of the registered write-ins, Brian Peschel, has a good chance of winning back his seat because of name recognition. But, you know, it's anybody's guess because basically the top vote getter out of the write-in will obtain that 3rd seat. But I don't recall ever where we've had such little interest to running even for the council or the school board, and actually it's happening at the same time. And what's interesting on the Common Council, if one of those write-ins would have just received or obtained the necessary signatures, they'd have been guaranteed a spot.
I know.
In just a few years, actually, what was it, 2 years ago, that there was there was so much competition for that council seat, or much more competition, that they had to draw a card to see who got the seat. I mean, you know, just short of flipping a coin or an arm wrestle, I mean, people were really vying for that seat. And I hear the same things. People I talk to in the community are pretty disenfranchised. They don't feel like the representatives on the elected bodies are a true reflection of the community. In fact, I would offer as evidence by so many 7-0 votes that there's really not a lot of broad discussion. But you know, it's
well,
just,
it is with the city council. It is frustrating. I mean, I think I knew this before I got on the council, but then once I got on, it was confirmed that the Common Council is not really a representative of the people as much as it is a board of directors of a corporation. I mean, in this city manager form of government, your city manager is like a CEO, and the council is conceived of as kind of like a board of directors. And so anyone who has a genuine people's agenda immediately feels disenchanted when they're on that board, or even when they're running. I mean, the questions that you get asked from the establishment media tend to be establishment level type questions. So I use that word disenfranchised. I think a lot of people are feeling that way, or disenchanted, maybe is the word that I would use. But still, it doesn't excuse it. I mean, there are lots of people in this community that I think should be running for office, especially, say, retirees who may have more time, who we know watch the meetings. I mean, we used to get tons of emails on the city council from people who had an opinion on everything. And very, very often I would say to those folks, have you ever considered running? So I think there are people out there who can run and probably should be running. Why they're not, I'm not sure. They don't want to dedicate the time. They don't want to get beaten up in the press. I mean, a whole bunch of things are going on. But something's got to change soon. I mean, how long can you go on in the city having this lack of interest in government? That's not healthy.
Well, what do you, when you look at the Common Council, there's 2 registered write-in candidates, and one of those 2, I presume, will...
I think there's more now. I've read 4 registered write-ins now.
Okay, well,
Your former colleague on the school board, Teresa Thiel, is now a registered write-in candidate.
Well, I know there's speculation of others. I don't know if they were, if they attained the formal registered status. I believe that's kind of new to this community in terms of a registered write-in versus a write-in. But what do you speculate is going to happen in that race? Do you think that Brian Peschel is going to be carried through because of his name recognition?
Maybe, and I like Brian. But I will say that it's going to be very, very difficult for me to vote for a registered write-in candidate. I mean, I don't think the threshold of getting 200 signatures is that difficult to meet. So, you know, for whatever reason, Brian and the others did not get it. I'm sure there were some good reasons, but I'm going to have difficulty personally voting for a registered write-in candidate. I will write in a name, and it may or may not be one of the registered write-in candidates. I found it unfortunate that the League of Women Voters invited the registered write-in candidates to their debate, not because I'm against debate. I completely support debate, but I think it sets potentially a troubling precedent. So in all future elections, when we get a registered write-in, how do you not invite them to the debate again, when the threshold was only 200 signatures, which really anyone ought to be able to get.
Well, that's a good point. And ironically, John Daggett, who's taken out papers numerous times for the Common Council, if he would have actually taken out papers for the Common Council, which requires 200 signatures, instead of the school board, which required 100 signatures, he'd have been guaranteed a spot. Yeah, unless one of the registered write-ins would have surpassed his vote total. So, so speaking of the school board, there are 2 incumbents running for re-election. The 2 incumbents are finishing up their first term, and of course John Daggett is also forcing really the only contested local race. Because as we stated, obviously the county exec, mayor, common council, all the incumbents are guaranteed a spot. There's been a lot of people talking that in terms of the school board race that they're going to, as a protest vote, I've heard this in my circus, my circles, that they're going to vote for John Daggett, and to send a message to the school board that these 7-0 votes and this consent resolution, these things that go through without any discussion, kind of raid money from here to pay for this. And recently the school board, knowing full well there's a $15+ million projected deficit the next several years, they're hiring, they're dipped into fund balance to hire people for permanent positions, creating new positions and dipping into fund balance, further exacerbating the future problems. So I don't know if you've been hearing that about the John Daggett dark horse. I mean, I think it's going to be a stretch, but again,
yeah, I anticipate that the incumbents will retain their seats in that race. But I think the school board has the same issue the common council has, and you experience this. You go on to a board like that, you're not an establishment person. All of a sudden the focus, I used to find this fascinating on the school board. I didn't agree with you on everything, of course, right?
Really?
Yeah, really. But I just find it interesting that your side would often lose 6-1, 5-2, and yet somehow you'd still get condemnation. And I used to watch that and think, okay, so are all votes supposed to be 7-0? Are we supposed to have no dissent at all in this community? I used to experience the same thing on the council. I don't particularly like being on the losing end of votes, right? So when you're on the and when I was on the council, thankfully we had some 4-3s and things like that, which showed that at least there was some nice dialogue going on. But we have to move beyond that in this community. That's the toxic part of Oshkosh politics. That it's not enough that you win a vote. Now you're still going to beat up on the person that opposed it, as if they're not even supposed to state a contrary point of view. I don't get that.
Right, and it's having no tolerance for diversity of opinion. And what I find is many people, and I know, and I'm going to delve into the conservative versus the liberal, a lot of the more liberal people that feel that we should have diversity, which we should have respect other opinions, we respect different beliefs. They're so intolerant when it comes to diversity of opinions in politics. And I witnessed that firsthand. The most liberal people that I knew that are probably extremely multicultural and just very tolerant of diversity in terms of non-politics, they hate you because they disagree with you because we disagree on a local issue or a vote. And really what I find, one of the reasons why I believe people don't run is because they look at these 7-0 bodies right now, these rubber stamp 7-0, 6-1 bodies, and they say, if I get elected, it's going to be a 6-1 vote on some issues or a 5-2 vote on some issues. I got labeled when I was on the school board for 3 terms, 9 years. I got labeled as voting no on everything by the Northwestern.
Right.
The fact is I voted yes on 95% of the items. The 5% that I voted no on were the issues that kind of made the headlines, like the school calendar, the rating fund balance to do this, teachers union contracts. It just really destroyed the infrastructure because they had to raid kids' programs and defer maintenance for. And I proudly look back at my record and say, yeah, I voted no because I essentially was pulling the brake on the runaway train of spending, and now it's so bad where they need a bailout.
So you say conservative and liberal. I would call it populist and establishment. And I think that when you've got populist or anti-establishment candidates, they get treated very, very harshly. Right. I mean, there are people like me who I would call myself populist or anti-establishment, who's to the left of where you are, but get the same response because, well, we're both suspicious of, for example, unelected officials, right? So my big frustration in local Oshkosh government is the city manager position. Not the city manager personally. I think he's a good guy. But we essentially have a government run by a CEO. And I don't know, I can't find that in any of the founding documents of this country, that that's the way you're supposed to run a city or a country. So that's philosophical. But you know, I agree with you. Well, there's a lot of intolerance. I'd put the intolerance, though, on all sides.
Well, it's interesting what Juan Williams, a Fox News now contributor, has said about the intolerance. He kind of pointed the finger right at the mainstream, more liberal media, saying they're the most intolerant. In fact, he feels like more conservatives has embraced in a much more tolerant of his differing viewpoints. But I actually, you know, this establishment, non-establishment, liberal, conservative, that can get into the taste-filling, less
right, exactly.
You know, taste-filling, taste great, less filling discussion. But I would simply offer as evidence in terms of more liberal people versus the establishment. As you look at local races, most of the people that are elected to local bodies are members of the Democratic Party, or have signed the recall papers. I know Mark Harris; he's a member of the Democratic Party. Probably signed the recall paper. Actually, I believe he has signed it. And you look at the school board. That's kind of a card-carrying group of either the teachers union, the recall petitioners, or the Democratic Party. Frankly, I don't know of any local member of a local body, any member of a local body that is a member of the Republican Party. So,
well, what does that tell you?
Well, and actually, I'll give credit where credit's due. That means the liberals are doing a good job getting elected to local bodies. I believe a lot of conservatives don't run because they look at a 7-0 body. They're like, well, I don't want to get elected to a 7-0 body and turn into a 6-1. And I believe a lot of people don't run because you have the Northwestern who just are relentless in terms of anybody that wants to raise questions. And usually a lot of the questions are raised by people that differ. And right now the ideologies in charge is, I believe, the more left, the more establishment individuals. So you're just going to have to deal with that headwind. And I mean, I still have shots taken at me, and I've been off the school board for almost a year.
I know.
It's like, seriously? I mean, I kind of find it somewhat comical in a sense, but so when I was on the school board, they'd always mention this. You know, the paper would mention me by name when they didn't agree, but when they didn't agree with the school board, they mentioned the board, and I just find it somewhat interesting. I think another reason why people don't run, and for example, recently there was, a few years ago there was a mayoral race.
Yes.
And someone we both know ran, and he was taken through the papers in terms of things that he did years ago, things that weren't really an issue that became a front page issue in terms of something happened, but really it was a disagreement with individuals, and the Northwestern just blew it up and made it sound like it was.
Well, you've mentioned the Northwestern several times. I mean, you know, clearly we need more media in this community. I mean, that's probably another reason why there aren't enough people running. And obviously you're doing alternative media here. I'd like to see more shows like this with people who represent all different points of view. Because, you know, you're right. I do think that the establishment media tends to support establishment candidates, right? I mean, when I ran for mayor, I didn't expect to be endorsed by the Oshkosh Northwestern. There was no way. I do think, though, in a case like that, a non-endorsement probably helps. I mean, did it ever hurt your feelings when you weren't endorsed by the Northwestern?
I would say it hurt my feelings. I mean, it didn't surprise me.
No.
But, you know, it's just one of those things, and I think you have to, when you're an outsider coming in and you don't have the comfort of knowing that your ideology's in the majority, I think that, you know, that's one thing that's going to occur. I think you're going to have a lot of people discouraged. So, you know, actually we're going to take a short break, and this clip is actually kind of outlining why in Oshkosh area politics opinion, why many people perhaps don't run for local office. So please stay tuned, and we'll see you on the conclusion at this break.
We just went through renewing a contract for a previous superintendent, and within a few weeks he was already looking for another job and left us. And so I guess I'm still a little raw from that. I think my biggest fear is, and it's nothing personal against Holly, and I understand that she's free to look for other jobs, but I want the person in this position to be somebody that's dedicated to this district, that we're not going to lose in a few months, and I'm worried about it. So I think I'd like us to keep considering other applicants before we decide.
Okay. Other discussion on the proposed amendment to this resolution?
I guess I'd like to hear what Stan has to say about that.
Board members first, or I can certainly respond. We certainly have that discussion, and we respect the fact that no employee in the district is hired under terms of involuntary servitude, that you are committed to that. The expectation after Holly's opportunity to be considered for superintendency certainly surfaced, but the sense that we had was that with knowledge in the district as limited as you recognize the fact that with the exception of two individuals in the cabinet, we had no one with more than 2 years. So my concern too was stability, and one of the things that you asked of me of trying to deal with stability, and from every audience I've appeared in from, was the issue of looking for stability in the district. I am confident and have comfort level in the fact that the knowledge that Holly brings to us after 2 years of experience is of great value to us in moving forward, and that my sense is that the position makes sense for Holly. It does not lock her into a year or 3 years from now making other decisions, but I'm willing to take the risk that
the point is that the track record is already there, and that was the data that I'm using. So I'm using the data that is already in front of us, and we already know that she has looked elsewhere, and she was considered elsewhere. So that's all. When we so desperately need stability, that doesn't mean somebody outside is going to be more stable, and it doesn't mean somebody inside is going to be more stable. All I'm saying is that this person has a track record, and that's what I'm using. I'm using the data. It's nothing personal.
Anybody else? Okay, I mean, I just want to state that I think Holly is an extremely bright and capable person, and would be an excellent fit for this job. I guess if there's no other discussion, then we'll call a vote on the proposed amendment.
Okay.
We actually offered that as an example of why perhaps people don't run for local office. You had a board member articulating a point of view. There was an individual that was in the central office, a high level of central office position, that the superintendent was advocating for a pay raise, and at the same time, while the superintendent was advocating for a pay raise, she was applying somewhere else and basically pitting one school district against another, and you had board members basically saying we need to keep her, and essentially just she utilized Oshkosh to get more money from another district. And one board member, I think, very articulately, calmly, rationally, with facts, made their point of view, and it was a majority vote that went through with very little feedback from the full board. So again, that's just offers evidence that I think why people don't run. What I was saying a few minutes ago, Tony, was one member that was running for a council candidate a few years ago, front and center in terms of some things that were non-issue. He was such a bad person. You know, he got into a scuffle at some local establishment. Really it was a disagreement. And then you have someone that runs for school board, and I'm not going to mention any names, but the school board member, top vote getter a few years ago, you know, was found guilty of disorderly conduct, and granted it was years ago. Seems to have a lead foot, you know, speeding tickets, operating a vehicle without proof of insurance, etc. And my point is, with some people, it seems like if they drop a piece of chewing gum on the ground, it's front and center. But if another person does something much more egregious, it's not an issue. And I just think that discourages a lot of people. We only have a few minutes left, and I want to talk about 2 more races, if that's okay.
Sure.
State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Evers, the incumbent's running against Don Pridemore. What's your prediction on that race?
I think Evers has done a decent job in a difficult environment. Pridemore, I think, is on the extreme conservative wing of the Republican Party, probably wants to dismantle the office of superintendent. So I'm going to support Evers in that one. Okay.
Well, and yeah, I mean, Don Pridemore, he's actually a member of the, he's been a member of the Assembly in actually 2004, and he focuses on smaller government and reform, and obviously Tony Evers, he's been an incumbent, so a lot of people know his position. Mm-hmm. And of course, the big race, the one that was the, we voted for in the primary, was the state Supreme Court. The incumbent, Pat Rogensack, is seeking another term against Ed Falone. Pat Rogensack, she was elected to the Supreme Court in 2003. She actually has, even prior to that, had judicial experience. And Ed Falone, he's a law professor at Marquette, constitutional scholar and practicing attorney. Handicap that race for us.
Well, I'm going to support Falone. He's the underdog. I don't think he has a great chance of winning. But let's face it, the state Supreme Court has become a national joke. I mean, literally coming to physical blows with each other. So I think we need some new blood in there. And I think for that reason alone, I might support Falone. But I also think he's very competent and qualified. And I heard him in the primary, and he sounds articulate, clearly understands the law. And I think we need some new blood there, so I'm going to support him.
So the fact that he has no judicial experience and has basically just been a practicing attorney?
He's a law school professor. I can't imagine that anyone out there understands the law better than him.
But you're a little biased because, let's face it, you're a professor.
So I know I wouldn't support.
You professors stick together. So
I ran for mayor against a professor.
So no, I know, and I wish you a little more time to kind of talk about that a little more. I mean, I think the important thing is people get out and vote. Just a reminder, viewers, April 2nd, Tuesday, is the election date. Yes. There's 6 races. Frankly, again, county exec, no opposition. Mayor, no opposition. Common council. And we kind of tag it the election won by default, and we hope that people that are watching this evening, please consider running in the future. I mean, it's a lot of work, but it's also rewarding if you're passionate about it.
I agree.
We know so many people, we've talked about it, that are just not really pleased with what's going on, and the only way to change it is to get involved. And
get your name out there.
Exactly, and I know, Tony, you'd accept people talking about it, mentor people, and perhaps if they have any questions. So
Sure
I guess on that note, we'd like to thank you for viewing. Again, please vote April 2nd, Tuesday. Even though there's not a lot of contention in the local races, we still ask you to get out and vote. One issue in particular we want you to do is just get involved and make your voice be heard. Attend these meetings. Contact your local elected officials. So on that note, again, thank you for tuning in. Good night, and God bless.